This is episode number 180 with Tal Ben-Shahar.
New concepts and ideas to help you reach your full potential. Reach your full potential. Reach your full potential. Small win, small win, small win. Keep your momentum going.
The Success 101 Podcast.
Welcome to the Success 101 Podcast. This is your host, Jared Warren, and each episode, my goal is to bring you a new concept or idea to help you maximize your full potential. Thanks for joining me here today. Now let's kick things off. Hey guys, welcome back to the Success 101 Podcast. As always, this is your host, Jared Warren, and so excited to be here with you guys today. Look, guys, there are just some podcasts that move the needle. This certainly is going to be one of those today as I bring on Tal Ben-Shahar onto the Success 101 podcast, someone who I have learned a ton from, and I cannot wait for you to hear his message today. But first, you'll never guess what I'm doing right now. I am staring directly into the sun. Not really, but don't tell my brain that because it doesn't know the difference. If you're following me on social media or if you've heard this podcast before, you may have heard me mention how much I absolutely love the human charger. Guys, recent discoveries have shown that there are photosensitive receptors throughout the human brain, much like those located in the retina of the eye. So those receptors are accessed by light flowing through the ear canals or through the nasal cavity, if you use it that way, using the human charger. So this bright light therapy device uses advanced LED earbuds. And when those photosensitive areas of the brain are stimulated by light, it affects your neural circuits via neurotransmitters. I know, it's like sci-fi stuff, right? It builds serotonin, dopamine, noradrenaline. So what you experience, guys, is an increase in energy levels, improved mood, increased mental alertness, quicker recovery from jet lag. You can use it as a pre-workout before you go to the gym, as many of you guys have mentioned doing before. I use it every morning whenever I wake up to help me pound less caffeine or just get alert much faster. And really, when you start setting your circadian rhythms right out of the gate the right way each day, you're going to notice a huge difference in your overall peak performance. The greatest advantage I love about this, guys, for someone like me who is constantly on the go, is how fast and easy it is to use. Again, you put these earbuds in, and after a 12-minute session, you are geared up and ready to go. If you guys want 20% off your order, please head to success101podcast.com/human charger. And in the promo code at checkout, please enter success101 to snag your 20% off. This little tiny gimmicky seeming device, and I know that's what some of you are thinking out there, has been a game changer for me and something that I cannot stop talking about. Go grab yours today. Speaking of things I can't stop talking about, or drinking for that matter, is this creation by my good friends over at Ample, A-M-P-L-E. In fact, if you want to know more about this after the podcast, go to amplemeal.com and you can find out more about it for yourself. But it's soy-free, gluten-free, non-GMO, no artificial sweeteners, no artificial flavors, all the goodness that you want packed into a meal replacement drink in a 400 or 600 calorie version. The nutritional profile of this thing is off the charts, guys. It's got healthy fats, super high quality healthy fats. It's got quality proteins, clean burning carbohydrates that have a low glycemic impact, probiotics, fiber, prebiotics, plant-based micronutrients, and a ton of other good things like Himalayan sea salt, lemon juice, cinnamon, monk fruit extract, stevia extract, dried honey. Need I say more? So go grab your 400 or 600 calorie awesomeness in a bottle by ordering Ample. My team has made that so easy to set up. Just head to success101podcast.com/ample. Again, that's A-M-P-L-E to go grab 15% off your order. And let's face it, guys, I wouldn't steer you in the wrong direction on anything, but this is a bottle full of goodness. I cannot wait for you to go grab your own. Guys, my book is still available as well for just the shipping cost at success101podcast.com/book. And at checkout, enter Success101 if you're in the United States to grab your paperback version for just the shipping cost. If you would prefer the ebook reader, or if you live outside of the United States, the ebook reader is the option for you for about the same cost. And believe me, you're going to want to have your hands on this as I continue to go through the live episodes, breaking down section by section, chapter by chapter of this vision building strategy manual that has helped so many of you guys reframe how you're thinking about your vision your compelling why, the 6 vision building activities, the 5 components for building your strategy has brought back a ton of feedback my way for how you guys are using this. So again, head to success101podcast.com/book, grab your paperback or ebook reader version. Today, especially as we get ready to gear up for 2018 right around the corner and you're making your end of year vision planning strategies. Now, on to our incredible show today with my good friend Tal Ben-Shahar. For those of you guys who haven't heard about Tal Ben-Shahar, you've likely heard of a lot of his work. Not only is he an author and lecturer, he taught 2 of the largest classes in Harvard University's history, positive psychology and the psychology of leadership. Today, Tal consults and lectures around the world to executives in multinational corporations, the general public, and at-risk populations. The topics he lectures on include leadership, happiness, education, innovation, ethics, self-esteem, resilience. I could go on, but basically everything toward leadership, peak performance, business, and what you guys want to hear about. Above all, he's a huge coach and advocate for mindfulness. We dive into a lot of that today, and his books have been translated into more than 25 languages and have appeared on bestsellers lists around the world. As you'll hear, we go pretty deep today around a true understanding of why Tal writes so much about happiness and what that means to him, framing happiness and peak performance in your own mind, being cautious about getting caught up in the pursuit of perfection, dealing with anxiety and the brain-body connection, external versus internal achievements and how we have dealt with those in Western versus Eastern cultures. We dove really deep into that and had a fascinating conversation around it. How meditation changes the brain and why it is crucially important for us to have meditation locked into our daily habits. And we even covered data about one of the life-changing strategies he writes about in the 4 personality archetypes. Which one do you fall in line with? The rat racer, the hedonist, the nihilist, or the happy archetype? I think you're going to love hearing about that. This is one you don't want to miss on the Success 101 podcast, so please share it with friends, family members, anyone you feel like could benefit from being more connected, more aware, dealing with less stress and the brain-body connection, and even where you or others fall within the 4 personality archetypes. So without any further delay, it is my absolute pleasure to welcome Tal Ben-Shahar to the Success 101 podcast. Hey everyone, welcome back to the Success 101 podcast. What an honor it is to have Tal Ben-Shahar here on the show. How are things going, Tal?
Going very well. Glad to be on the show.
Well, I'm glad to have you here. I know we've had a little bit of tough time getting things scheduled with your travels and communication issues and technology issues, but here we are. It was bound to happen. I wanted to make sure I got you on for the wealth of knowledge that you have and how many times you have been mentioned on the Success 101 podcast already in certain other episodes. And I'm just so honored to have you on, but also excited for my listeners because I know you give so many actionable takeaways. And when we're talking about peak performance, which is what this podcast is centered around, much of your work centers around that either directly or indirectly. But I think I want to start off on the concept of happiness and how you define happiness. And I know there's some people that maybe disagree with your definition of happiness out there, but you've got data to back that up through other countries. But then also the pursuit of happiness has really been proven to be exactly opposite of what makes people happy. Why don't we take that whatever direction you want to, and let's start diving in there if you don't mind.
Sure. So, the definition of happiness is very much debated. And it's okay that it's debated, and it actually doesn't matter that much because when you give a definition of happiness, it's a little bit like beauty. You know it when you see it. The key when defining happiness is to understand this is not the ultimate or only or definitive definition of happiness. It's a definition that is something that we can work with. And that is the most important because, happiness, unlike many other topics, is interesting because it's practical. So it's not just for theoretical reasons and for theoretical precisions that we want to define happiness. It's for, how is it going to help my life? How is it actually going to make me happier? So with that in mind, the definition that I found most useful for happiness is one that encompasses the 5 elements of a human being. And these 5 elements would be spiritual well-being, physical well-being, intellectual well-being, relational or interpersonal well-being, and finally emotional well-being. And when we can experience well-being in each of these 5 elements, spiritual, physical, intellectual, relational, and emotional, that is when we're fulfilling our potential for for happiness, for a full and fulfilling life.
And I'm glad you mentioned that that's personal to different people, and it doesn't matter if we disagree on this definition because of just that. It is different for different people. I know that the data that you have shown in your writings, if, like I said, people don't agree with that definition of happiness, you'd say it's not just a feeling of one person to the next, but rather studies have been done on all the countries out there that back that data up. Talk to me a little bit about people who aren't happy all the time. So if they hear your writing on happiness, happiness this, happiness that, they go, well, wait a minute. If I'm not happy all the time, but yet I feel like those 5 elements are lining up personally for me in my life, what about people that fall into those categories, or people who are even trying to suppress negative emotions to force themselves to be happy?
Right. So you see, so the last element that I mentioned was the emotional element. And here it's very important to understand that a happy life is not a life which is devoid of painful emotions. I often say that there are only 2 kinds of people who do not experience painful emotions, such as anger or sadness or anxiety or disappointment or envy. 2 kinds of people. The first kind are the psychopaths, and the second kind of people who do not experience these emotions are dead. So experiencing, sadness or envy or anxiety or anger at times, it's actually a good sign. It means that you're not a psychopath and you're alive. The problem in today's culture, and here lies the real misunderstanding, is that a happy life is a life that is devoid of painful emotions. And many people come to me and say, so Tal, have you mastered the art and science of happiness? And of course, what they mean by that is, are you happy, or do you experience a high all the time? And the answer is no, and I hope not to master it for a very long time, because I hope to live for a very long time. And again, only dead people and psychopaths don't experience painful emotions.
Yeah, and I've heard, similar things before where, maybe they don't describe it that way. I love how you put that. But all people, if you have just a normal thinking mind and you're dealing with the chaotic world that we live in today out there, you're going to have those emotions. And it doesn't mean you're not happy or you haven't mastered this happiness or you're on the wrong track. It just means that you're human, you're normal, you're alive. I'm going to bring this from the context of the West, which I know your background started off in Israel, I believe. Why do you think we in the West suppress emotions so often? I've heard countless, papers and books and things that talk about how we just deal with emotions very, I guess for lack of better words, just incorrectly over here, very unhealthily. Why do we suppress emotions so often over here in our culture when that is the sign of the life, that you're a normal functioning person?
Right. You see, the model that we have in the West is that of a machine. The machine has really, we've done very well in terms of creating machines. The machines have done very well by us in terms of contributing to our life. So that has become our model, whether it's the Industrial Revolution, it's the steam engine, or today it's the microprocessor. And this is our ideal. Now, an ideal machine is one that doesn't break down, that can go on and on and on. And this is how our computers crash less often, and engines fail less often. And that seems to be the ideal for a human being. But that is not, unfortunately, here is where the analogy or the metaphor breaks. Because we're not machines. I often say, I am a passionate human being, not a perfect machine.
Right.
And striving to be a perfect machine is counterproductive. It will actually lead to suboptimal performance and lower levels of happiness. Look at emotions as ongoing feedback. It's sort of like the printout of our system. And if I experience anxiety or sadness or anger or whatever emotion, that provides me with the printout of how my system is doing. And then I can ask myself, okay, so why am I feeling anxiety? Or why am I feeling anger? Or why am I feeling envy or sadness? There are always reasons for these emotions, and trying to figure it out, that can take us to the next level, because that's also a step towards or step in the right direction in terms of how can I feel better, or what can I do to reach a higher level of performance or functioning. So see them as feedback, see them as printouts, not to dismiss them. So it's not to say, oh, well, I'm experiencing sadness, whatever. It is important to look inside and to analyze and to ask ourselves, why these emotions are present.
So if we know that those emotions are there and we know that we are actively identifying them, what would you say? I know there's people out there that try to give a lot of advice on this. In fact, if you go into any bookstore out there, self-help is, likely one of the largest sections, and there's everybody in social media on every corner that you turn trying to give self-help advice. Personally, how does someone break out of a cycle of negativity or unhappiness who really wants that pursuit, not maybe of perfectionism, but of that happiness, really mastering those 5 elements?
Yeah, so the first step is acceptance, full acceptance of the emotion, whatever it is. The paradox here is that when we reject painful emotions, they actually only intensify. You see it in the workplace. You see it among athletes. My background is in sports. I played professional squash, and I remember whenever I used to get anxious, at least for the first few years of my career, I would say to myself, Tal, don't get anxious, don't get nervous, before tournaments, big games. And of course, what happened was the exact opposite of my intention. I would only get more nervous and more anxious. Whereas if I would just let myself experience the emotion and literally flow through me, then it would be much more likely to dissipate, to weaken, and ultimately to come down to the healthy levels. So that's one thing. The other thing, in addition to acceptance, is to reframe these emotions. One of the mistakes that many people make about experiencing an emotion like anxiety is that they try to invoke its opposite. Now, the opposite of anxiety would be calm. And they would say, okay, now breathe deeply and feel calm. That actually usually doesn't work. Why? Because calm is so far removed from anxiety that we can't deal with it, we can't handle it, and as a result, failing to do what we try to do, it very often gets worse, or we feel helpless in the face of anxiety. However, if we experience anxiety and say to ourselves, okay, now experience excitement. Now, anxiety and excitement are very close physiologically.
Right.
In fact, they're almost identical. And when I experience anxiety in my body physiologically, there's the adrenaline, the epinephrine, this is going through my system. It doesn't take much to switch that anxiety to excitement. And it can be done just with a reframing, cognitive reframing. I'm excited. I'm so much looking forward to playing, to speaking in front of an audience, or whatever it is that induced the anxiety.
You're human like the rest of us. You're not a machine. You have passions, you have pursuits, you have emotions, and you also have anxiety. You had mentioned that telling yourself to be calm and be relaxed actually sometimes for most people can bring on more of that. Are you doing any sort of cognitive meditations, deep breathing? What do your rituals look like for calming yourself down when it comes to that type of situation?
Good. Yeah. Jared, you asked me a few minutes ago about what do we do in the West. For thousands of years, here in the West, we've made incredible progress when it comes to the external world. I'm in New York City. I look outside my window and I'm amazed. The buildings, the technology. We've landed, a man on the moon. Soon, a person will land on Mars. It's actually quite remarkable what we have done, starting with the ancient Greeks all the way, to the Renaissance, the Industrial Revolution, now the IT revolution. Amazing stuff. But that's all in the external world. When it comes to the internal world, we haven't done well. We've actually done very poorly. In fact, levels of depression and anxiety are on the rise. Levels of happiness are going down. We're just not doing well when it comes to the internal world. So this is, very broadly speaking, what we have done in the West. Now let's move to the East. In the East, for thousands of years, the external world was left untouched. It was doing just fine as it was. No need for external intervention, no significant progress when it comes to the external world. And even the progress that we see today in the East, much of it comes from the West, Western technology, Western science, and so on. However, when you look at the internal world, remarkable progress has been made in the East over the past few thousand years. Really remarkable. The West has done very well externally, quite poorly when it comes to the internal world. The East, in contrast, has not done much externally, but a great deal internally.
That's so interesting. I've never thought about it that way before. That's such a great point.
And this is what I've been thinking about a lot over the last few years. Also, when it comes to my personal practice. So most of my personal practice today revolves around meditation and yoga. I'm also a yoga teacher, and I have found so many more answers, so many more effective techniques. And there's a great deal of wisdom, and we need to use it a great deal more. Now, here is the thing, though. There are no shortcuts, no exception. It's all about practice. And this practice, it means putting in the time. Just like you wouldn't learn how to play the piano by just reading a book and understanding how to play the piano. You would need to practice it hours and hours a day. In the same way, do you want a more fulfilled, happy life? Well, you need to put in the time. And that means meditating on a regular basis or doing yoga or some form of mind work that will enable you to be calmer, to have, what I describe as a stronger psychological immune system. Because remember, a strong immune system doesn't mean you don't get sick. It just means you get sick less often. And when you do get sick, you get well more promptly. You recover more promptly.
What would you say to that type of person who says, I'm not making time for it each day. It's an afterthought. Sometimes I do it. Sometimes I forget, but it just doesn't really seem like it's doing a whole lot for me. When it comes to that practice idea that you just mentioned, I guess is how I'm framing that.
Yes. So a couple of things, I came up with the same, what today I see as an excuse. When I started studying it, and then I went to my teacher and I said, I just don't have time. I have so many things on my plate. And he asked me, did you brush your teeth this morning? And I said, yeah, of course. And he said, are you going to brush your teeth tonight? And I said, yeah, I do at least twice a day, every day. And he said, well, why? And I said, because, hygiene is important for me, for my health. And he said, well, mental hygiene is no less important. And this is what meditation is all about. It's about mental hygiene. In fact, people who have been meditating for many years, They don't really need to meditate every day. They have their, to use a metaphor, more than a metaphor, because it is quite an apt description, is, their meditation muscles are in their long-term memory. So it's like riding a bike. They already are much more present than most people are. So they don't really need to meditate every day. However, they do. Why? Because they say that it's like leaving home without brushing your teeth. Something just doesn't feel right. So they do it on a regular basis, and there is no other way. And, in the past I used to say, okay, so I first have to get my 5 hours of work a day, writing or whatever I was doing, preparing lectures. And after that, I will meditate. But sometimes, I would be so tired after, and I had other things and urgent things, so I wouldn't get to it. Today, it's the first thing that I do when I wake up. First thing that I do. Why? Because it then paints the entire canvas of my whole day. It actually affects how I write later. It affects how I interact with my kids later. It affects how I experience my life, how strong or weak my psychological immune system is. So I do it before everything else because it's the foundation. I spoke earlier of the spiritual, physical, intellectual, relational, and emotional well-being. Well, meditation affects every single one of these elements. It affects how we experience life spiritually, whether we experience meaning in our life. It affects us physically. There's a lot of research showing the impact of meditation on physical health. It affects us intellectually. We're much more focused, sharp when we meditate regularly. It affects our relationships significantly. We're a lot calmer, more open towards other people, more generous if we meditate. And finally, it affects our emotional state. Doing these practices, and again, what kind of meditation? You have to find what works for you. But doing this kind of mind work on a daily basis, I cannot overemphasize how important that is.
Not to give pushback on this, but if somebody was to be, a naysayer on this, they could say, well, Tal, I brush my teeth in the morning because I know I should, but really my mouth tastes awful whenever I wake up. So it's not even as much of a habit as it is just, I know I need to go clean my mouth. For many people out there, they're not starting off their day with meditation because they just haven't felt the benefits of it yet like you have, where that if you don't do it, it's going to impact those 5 things and maybe even ripple out into other things.
Yes.
If we can hang on this just a little bit longer, maybe speak to that to someone who says, well, the toothbrush thing really isn't a fair analogy because I do it for different reasons.
Yeah. Well, you do it because your mom told you to do it for the first 7 years of your life until it became a
Right.
ritual. And here we don't have the benefit of mom telling us to meditate every day. If we did, then we would do it. We would feel just the same way. But there is something else here, and you know, you're onto a very important point, because it took me a long time to actually start meditating regularly. And what for me did it was being exposed to the research. So, you know, when people told me, you know, you should meditate, it has done wonders for me, and look at all those ancient texts that talk about it. Yeah, interesting, but not compelling enough. But once I started looking at the research, the data coming out on how meditation actually changes your brain, and it's almost indisputable, you know, the amount of research that's coming out showing the benefits of it. That got me thinking, okay, I need to invest more in it. And then once you start investing in it, then it becomes like brushing your teeth. But the initial push, at least for me, and I know for many people with whom I work, whether in organizations where I consult or with my in academic institutions, once they see the data, the very compelling data about the benefits thereof, that gets them over the initial reluctance, or it gets them to prioritize it.
As children, you're exactly right. If our parents are there telling us about something, we're apt to do it. We don't need research, and we don't even, who cares if our breath stinks and our mouth tastes bad? We don't care about that as kids. We just don't want to brush our teeth half the time. As adults, we need that, the reports, we need the data, we need something to move the needle that shows us, if you don't do this, here are the consequences. That's a great, great point. Your book that I just can't speak enough on, and how I was first introduced to you, Happier. Was that your first actually published work that you had put out, or was there anything before that?
No, before that I'd actually put out a book on happiness. I self-published it because 50 publishers had turned it down. So no, it wasn't my first book, but my first mainstream book.
That's how I was introduced to your work originally, through a coach that I was working with at the time. And really, I didn't even get the book. I got the actual journal, or the gratitude journal, called Even Happier. And I just thought it was the greatest thing how each week you take us through a series of outside of the box or mind-opening educational type ideas to help stretch and grow. One of the things that I would say was life-changing for me, and I don't throw those words around lightly, were the 4 archetypes that you talked about in there. And there may be a lot of our listeners who have not read that book or seen the journal, and basically just talked about attaining lasting happiness requires that we enjoy the journey on our way, which I am very self-admittedly very poor about celebrating, very poor when it comes to enjoying the journey. It's always the chase, the rat racer, the chase of whatever's over the horizon. But I need to learn how to enjoy, and I've picked up a lot of this, and some of it's been from your work as well, but enjoying the journey on the way to the destination that we find valuable. Number 1 is the rat race archetype. Number 2, the hedonism archetype. Number 3 is the nihilist or the nihilism archetype. And then eventually the happiness archetype, which is where we're trying to go. Can you do just a quick breakdown on those and why they impact negatively so many people out there who are really seeking after more fulfillment and happiness in their life?
Yeah, so, again, if I go to the distinction or the focus between East and West, in the West, there is a great deal of focus on the future. So, we're told from a very young age, I'm 4 years old, and my parents are already thinking about what school am I going to go into? Sometimes today I see it in New York. Parents are putting pressure on their kids to go to a good kindergarten that will get them into a good elementary school, that will get them into a good high school. And it's always about the future. Okay, so you get into a great college so that you get a great job, and on and on. And it never ends. So I'm not against delayed gratification. The problem, though, is that if we delay gratification too much, we end up ungratified. Why? Because no one lives indefinitely. So if you indefinitely delay gratification, you'll never get to it. And that's the Western model, and that's the model that I call the rat race. It's all about the future. It's all about the advancement. It's all about getting to the next level at work, making more money, getting a bigger house, and so on, and never being satisfied with what we have. So that's the rat race archetype.
It was just as you described in the book. For me, it was always thinking that if I just got to the next, horizon, if I could just get over that next horizon, then I could slow down, then I would have all my ducks in a row, then I could rest, then I could relax. But what happens? You get to that horizon to realize there's really no horizon. It just keeps going. and you never learn to slow down. As you achieve more, you get comfortable with that. You go, oh, well, maybe that wasn't the big thing. Maybe it's the next thing over the next corner. And I had to break myself out of that, and your work was instrumental for that part.
Well, I'm glad. Thank you. And we see the manifestation of the rat race, the extreme manifestation in the most successful people in our culture. So you look at the rock stars, the real superstars. Very often, what happens, or the scenario, is that they're not happy, but they're not that concerned about it because they know that once they make it, then they'll be happy. And they struggle and they suffer perhaps, and then they make it. And then they become very wealthy and very sought after, and they can get any man or woman they want, and they can buy anything that they want. And, they've fulfilled all their dreams. And yet they're still not happy. And here is the problem, because now they no longer have the illusion that once they make it, once they get there, then they'll be happy because they've made it. They're there. But they realize that there is no there.
Right.
And they're scared. And they're looking for answers elsewhere. They're looking for answers outside of reality, because reality didn't provide them the answer, the solution to their unhappiness. And what is outside? Outside means maybe drugs, maybe alcohol, or maybe the ultimate escape from reality, which is suicide. And we see many such cases and a great deal of misery among the highly successful people. Why? Because the model just doesn't hold water. The model of the rat race, that once I get there, there will be a there. There isn't.
Correct. And then I did exactly what you wrote about, which is many times when we get out of the rat race and we realize that there is no there, we switch gears almost a complete 180 to the hedonism archetype. It's like, okay, nothing's out there. There's no there. Let me just try to make sure that I'm pleased and happy at every moment along the way, no matter what.
Yes.
No matter what the future brings. I just want to be happy right now.
Right now, exactly. And that's when we get to the hedonist. And the hedonist is the opposite of the rat racer. The rat racer is all about the future. The hedonist is all about the present. The future doesn't matter because, after all, it has provided me no solace, no happiness. Then I should just focus on the other side, which is the here and now. And that's the only thing I care about. And the mantra that they live by is seek pleasure, avoid pain. Whatever makes me feel good now, that is what I need to do. And initially, hedonism feels great, and you indulge yourself in present moment, joy, ecstasy, whatever it takes just to feel good now. It really doesn't matter what happens in the future. And initially, it's wonderful, but it doesn't last. Because we're also, as Marty Seligman talks about, the founder of positive psychology, we are prospective animals as well. We do care about the future as well. So just living in the present and ignoring any future ramifications or consequences, that's not healthy and it's not sustainable. So the hedonist ultimately gets bored, even if he or she has every reason to celebrate the here and now. So so sex, drugs, and videotapes, that's just not enough for a happy life. We do need something that we can look forward to. We need dreams, we need ideals, and these are all in the future. So the hedonist doesn't work, but very often a person who tries the rat race archetypes, the future living, tries the hedonist archetype, the present living, then realizes that neither works and then becomes resigned. And resignation is about nihilism, is about nothing works. And that's where that's where people become depressed. The difference between sadness and depression is that depression is sadness without hope. So we all experience sadness, but if there is no hope there, then there is the danger of it becoming depression. And a person who's tried living in the future didn't work, who's tried living in the present, that didn't work, is now helpless, is now hopeless, is now very likely to experience nihilism, or in its psychological psychological term, depression.
And I think that's where your work helped me the most, just letting you know here, because I had for years since my young 20s just muscled it through. I had said I could outwork anybody. I was competitive. I had a lot of pride on getting very little sleep and still being able to thrive over all of my peers. And it worked until I grew up and I had children and I had an office to run and I started having weightier tasks on me. And I got completely burned out, which is kind of where, this is where the podcast came from, was helping people understand that there is a better life out there. But I'd gotten completely burned out from what I was doing. And I got so burned out that my main aim every single day was to reduce stress no matter what it took. And then I became very apathetic to competition, very apathetic to contests. I didn't care anymore because to me that was stress. And I had been doing that for so long that I just wanted to be happy right now, which really translated to no stress right now. And I'm so fortunate, so grateful and fortunate that things like your work and others, Zig Ziglar, other people, Jim Rohn, classic people that, I used to think positivity was like this pie in the sky, Pollyanna, it doesn't really work. You guys and your work and your writing really helped me from slipping into that nihilist ideal, because I didn't get there, because that hope came back that, hey, you know what? I can enjoy the journey along the way and I can celebrate at the summit, but I'm missing a lot of life and wasting a lot of life not celebrating along the way. And I think, we keep coming back to the West, but maybe it's this way for everybody that's hard charging, anybody running a business or anything around the world globally. You get to that point where you just wonder, okay, what am I supposed to do now and where am I supposed to go? And if you didn't have that hope in place, that hard charging can't just last forever, because you'll wear down. You'll just break down.
Right. Yes, exactly. And the antidote to this resignation, to this nihilism, is learning to combine the two approaches. In a sense, bringing East and West together. So if West is future thinking and East is present thinking, it's about reconciling the two. And the way to do it is to have goals, is to have ideals, is to have dreams. Dreams, ideals, and goals that are personally meaningful, a sense of purpose, something that is important to you to achieve in the future. And then once you have that, and here lies the key, once you have that goal, the objective, the ideal, let it go. There's a lovely story that I quote in my book, that I describe in my book, from another book, which is one of my favorites, called Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance.
Oh yeah.
In which Robert M. Pirsig talks about how he, as a young man, went on an expedition towards one of the Himalayan peaks, and he went along with a group of monks who were all significantly older than he was. He was fit and strong, and yet he ended up giving up. He couldn't make it to the top. It was too grueling, too hard. Whereas the monks, who were significantly older than he was, made it to the top. And upon further reflection, he realized what had happened. And what had happened was that they all wanted to get to the peak. It was very clear where they wanted to go. But he constantly was looking up towards the peak. And when he looked up towards the peak, it seemed, ominous and far and perhaps too difficult, perhaps unattainable. And that drained him of energy. Whereas the monks, they knew, just as he did, where they were going. But once they knew the direction, they could let go. And then they focused on each step of the way. And each step is not ominous or scary or unattainable. It's simply a step. And they took step by step by step until they eventually got to the top that way. And this is a very good metaphor to think about as we go through life. Yeah, goals are important, ideals are important, but they're not the source of happiness. The source of happiness is the present. It's the present when you have that future goal in the back of your mind, when you have this sense of direction, this sense of purpose guiding you. And once you have that, just focus on what you're doing today. Whether it's a podcast or a paragraph that you're working on, or a conversation that you're having, as much as possible to be present. Again, the power of now, as Eckhart Tolle talks about.
And I've often reflected on different things in my life that I'm trying to grow through and have grown from tremendously, and becoming a different person, as we all try to do, and focus on that. And I haven't figured out yet why it is so hard for myself or many hard charging people out there to celebrate the journey. People who are so competitive and people who love to win so much. Any ideas you have on that through your research of why some of the most competitive people, myself included, and people I know in life, just almost don't know how to celebrate along the way? I haven't figured that one out yet, because it seems so contradictory and backwards to the way we should be viewing things.
Right. Here is a way, not the only way, but a way to think about it, and more importantly than to think about, to do something about. So, we are by our nature adaptive beings. What does that mean? We adapt. I often think of my cousin who lives literally under an airport. Whenever an airplane takes off, their house shakes. Now, when we go over there for dinner, my kids are scared. They don't even know, but my cousins and their kids, they don't even notice the planes taking off. Why? Because they've been living there for years, and it's just they've adapted to it. We also adapt to losses. After losing someone dear to us, initially most people just can't function. They don't want to function. They just want to cry and crawl up in bed. But we adapt and we learn to integrate the experience. Most people learn to integrate the experience into their lives, and they move on. We adapt. We also adapt, unfortunately, to good things. So you get a new car, and you're thrilled by it, and it's amazing, and you just want to be in the car all the time. But then a month or two go by, and it's a car that gets you from point A to point B. Same, unfortunately, with relationships. Why are there so many divorces? Why is there so much? Even people who do stay together, why is there the loss of love? Because initially there is the excitement, but then after a while you adapt, and you seek a novel experience, more excitement. So we adapt for good and for ill, and this applies very much to everyone, but it has an even more profound impact, negatively profound impact, on very successful people. Why? Because when you succeed and when you do well, you feel good, because you get external validation and people, patting you on your back, and you see your name out there, and you may get financial rewards and be able to get stuff that you've always wanted. So successful people, they get a lot of extrinsic stimulation in their lives, and initially it feels amazing. But because they get a lot of it, because they're very successful, these are the people we're talking about, they're very successful, they get a lot of external stimulation. After a while, the impact of external stimulation wears off. They get used to it. And initially they say, okay, so I have to get to the next level, make more money, or get to a higher level in the organization, or become more famous and do even better, and so on and so on. Initially, they get to the next level, but ultimately, even that wears off, and there is nowhere else to go. Or even if there is a place to go and they go there, it no longer affords the same excitement, because they've adapted to the external validation. They've adapted to success. They've adapted to all those stimulations that in the past did it for them, but no longer do. The question is, so what's the solution? And I must say, I go back to meditation. Why? Because what does meditation do? In meditation, what I'm focusing on is a breath, or what I'm focusing on is a physical sensation in my, in tip of my fingers, or what I'm focusing on is a flame. I'm focusing on minute details, and what's that does to me? Initially, I'm very bored. But over time, I learned to experience stimulation, sufficient stimulation in those details, in those little things. So essentially what I'm doing is I'm going against the adaptation process that comes with success, a process that makes me less sensitive to stimulation and less sensitive to to external changes and makes me a lot more sensitive to them. So I become more sensitive, and hence I'm able to enjoy things a lot more. And I no longer need, a new win or a new promotion or a new woman to make me happy. I'm more than content. I'm thrilled, in fact, and excited and happy with what I have, because I've become so sensitive. And it's the opposite of being desensitized. I become sensitive to life.
Yeah, and being in the now, being in the moment.
It's all about being in the present.
Gosh, there's just so much I want to ask you. I know you've done a ton of research on the power of breathing, as you're talking about meditation. Just for the sake of time that we have here, I think what might be most helpful for my guests as we get ready to wrap up the podcast is focusing on weaknesses, why that is wrong. There was a period of time a while back, I don't remember when, but all you ever heard was people saying, focus on your weaknesses, shelf what you're strong about because you're already strong there. Focus on your weaknesses, and overall, you'll be a more well-rounded person. The exercises like the wheel of life, how in balance or out of balance are you on these different things? And if it was a wheel, how bumpy would it be, going down the road, those sort of things. Now, so much research is coming out on focusing on weaknesses is actually the wrong approach. Even though people think they are so right, even if they've never been told or consulted that way, they think naturally if they work on their weaknesses, they will be better. What has your research shown people when it comes to peak performance, why focusing on weaknesses really is the wrong approach to take, and why focusing on our strengths alone and ignoring the weaknesses might take us much further down this path?
Yeah, so the place to look here as an apt analogy would be sports. When I came to college, I was not recruited for football. I'm 5'7" and weigh very little. The football coach wasn't interested. The squash coach was interested. Why? Because I'm fast and I can run for a long time. And these are strengths that are good for squash, not for football, not for basketball. So, and yet when it comes to other areas, such as the workplace, so many people focus on their weaknesses, trying to make football players, metaphorically speaking, out of squash players. And that's wrong. Why is it wrong? You see, so my research mostly focused on self-esteem, on self-confidence. Now, imagine a 10-year-old girl who's very strong, very good at mathematics, but not great when it comes to her writing skills. Now, most schools, what would they focus on? They would focus on her writing skills because, as you said earlier, she's already good at math. But we don't need to focus on that. Now, what happens to her self-esteem, to her self-confidence, when the focus primarily, day in and day out, is on her weak areas? Her self-esteem will go down. Now, the important thing, and this is where my research comes in, is that self-esteem knows no boundaries. Meaning, if I experience constantly failure after failure after failure, being told or experiencing myself as less than mediocre in one area, that will trickle to other areas. So if I experience it in writing, or this girl experiences it in writing, she will also lose self-confidence when it comes to her social interactions. She will ultimately also lose self-confidence in mathematics, where she was originally good at. And we know, as the psychologist Nathaniel Branden said, self-concept is destiny. In other words, what we think about ourselves, how we evaluate ourselves, becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. If I think poorly of myself, I will most likely perform poorly. So this is where this girl is when the focus is primarily on her weak area, writing. But say this same girl goes to a school or meets a teacher who understands that the primary focus needs to be on strength, and that teacher focuses on her math skills. First of all, what will happen is she'll get a lot better at it. As she becomes better, she'll also start helping others. She'll become a star. Her self-confidence, her self-esteem will go up. And again, self-esteem knows no boundaries. That will have an effect on her social skills. That will have an effect also on her weak areas, such as writing. And overall, she will do better. And yet, most schools, most workplaces are deficiency, weakness focused rather than strength focused.
Yeah, and I think the fear there for most people, if you think logically about it, they just assume if I only work on the things that I'm great at, and I've kind of checked the box, so to speak, on that I'm going to really miss out on the overall development of myself. So I have to focus on those weaknesses, or else I'm missing out on what I really could be.
Yeah. Right. So it is important to point out that, Peter Drucker said it best. Peter Drucker said, manage your weaknesses while focusing on your strengths. So it's not about ignoring my weaknesses. If I'm a manager and I'm a very good strategic thinker but have very poor people skills, it doesn't mean I should completely neglect my people skills. Yeah, I should improve them to a point where it doesn't hurt my performance and my ability to use my strength. I think about it in a soccer analogy. You have a person who has amazing footwork and kicks, but that person is slow. Well, that person does want to improve their speed somewhat so that they get into position to be able to kick. But they don't need to become an Usain Bolt or a Ronaldo. They need to be fast enough to position themselves to be able to kick.
So Tal, as we get ready to wrap up the podcast, thanks so much for your time. I think our listeners would take a ton away, not only from the things that you've mentioned so far, and then we're also going to talk about your new book, The Joy of Leadership, and where we can steer listeners toward that as well. But I think with so much around peak performance, which is the aim of this show, and we've alluded to it several times here, it's the meditation, it is the framing from being in the rat race or the hedonist to the happiness pursuit or happiness advantage. I know you've done some research on the power of breathing, piggybacking on the meditation part here, but I'd love to know as we wrap up, what are some of the rituals that have helped you pursue relaxation, recovery, happiness, any of those things that you feel like have really moved the needle in your life, maybe including breath work and how you're using that daily in your own life?
Right. So, beyond the usual suspects, so I exercise daily, I do yoga. What I also introduce on a regular basis is a few deep breaths. So 3 to 4 deep breaths, 4 to 5 times a day, where I just stop for a minute and take 5 to 6 seconds in, 5 to 6 seconds out. 3 to 4 such breaths. In a sense, what that does is it resets the system and brings me to a point, to a healthy point of relaxation. And again, it doesn't take much, 3 to 4 breaths, but the key here, and this is the key, is to do it on a regular basis. So you do it, even if you do it 3 times a day or twice a day, but you do it every day. Additionally, I would really urge the listeners to look into some of the breath work that's been done in pranayama, in yoga, whether it's the fire breath or the short breaths, or the 3-step breath where you breathe into your your neck and then your chest, and then the third part of the breath is you fill up your belly, and then again out of your belly, out of your chest, and out of your throat. These kind of breaths, conscious breaths, can go a very long way in changing the quality of your present and, if done regularly, future experiences.
And are you using any sort of a guided meditation for your own practices, or any sort of an app, or what is your best go-to at this point now of your life?
Yeah, so I've done a wonderful course called the Finders course with Jeffrey Martin that teaches a number of meditation practices, and what that course does, and what I've done is I've looked for I've through trial and error. I've looked for things that best that resonate with me, that best work for me. And what I do is I do simple what's called vipassana breath, which is focusing on the air going in and out through my nose, and then body scans I found very helpful as well.
Boy, I try to do body scans whenever I'm doing my own meditation, and for some reason that's the one where my brain, I can be so dialed into my breath and so locked in. And if I'm doing a guided meditation and they say, okay, start scanning down through the body, boy, my brain just goes wild. I have no idea why I haven't been able to lock that one in. But tell me about your new book and where we can point listeners toward finding it. I'm sure anywhere that books are sold, including Amazon. But The Joy of Leadership, I'm really excited to get my hands on this one. Tell us a little bit about why Why the joy of leadership, or why leadership for your next book? What pointed you in that direction?
So The Joy of Leadership is a book I co-authored with Angus Ridgway, who was a senior director at McKinsey and had worked on their leadership development program. And what we essentially showed is that happiness and leadership are two sides of the same coin. Today, there are two sides of the same coin, meaning for the 21st century leader in a world that's ever-changing, where creativity, innovation, thinking outside the box are not luxuries but must-haves. In this world, you look at all the research on contributing to happiness, and every single point there also contributes to better leadership. So we essentially laid out a framework for helping leaders at every level of the organization. And that, by the way, could also apply to a family, parents, or it could also apply to teachers, where leaders can follow a framework and enhance their levels of well-being, and as a result, also become better leaders.
And where can we steer more traffic your way, whether it be your own website, social media, any place that people can find out more about you and your work?
Yeah, so my website has links to the various projects that I'm involved with, and it's talbenshahar.com.
Well, thanks so much. We certainly appreciate your time here today. I know the listeners are going to take so much away from this. And, I get excited about every podcast, but for someone whose writings have really impacted and changed my life, I was honored to have you on, and really had a great time here with you today. So keep up the great work. We wish you continued success, and we'll be following you from afar, and certainly going to get my hands on your new book. So thanks again.
Right. And thank you very much, Jared, for all the work that you do.
Guys, I loved having Tal on the podcast today and hope you took a ton away from his message about being more connected, the 4 personality archetypes, internal versus external achievements and how to frame that, and a whole lot about mindfulness and peak performance. If you guys would like to connect directly with me, the best way to do that is to shoot an email to my team at info@success101podcast.com, or you can catch me in the world of social media on the Facebook Success 101 Podcast community page, or on Instagram under the name @Success101 Podcast. I'll catch you guys on the next awesome episode. Until then.